Throughout history, empires and state powers have relied on a brutal, calculated logic to maintain absolute control. The assumption is simple. If you inflict enough overwhelming physical agony on a population, you will break their will to resist. But history also reveals a fatal flaw in that calculation. There is a breaking point where terror stops producing compliance and instead triggers something far more dangerous. When an oppressive system pushes violence past an unforgivable threshold, it rarely crushes resistance. Instead, it accidentally radicalizes the victims, forging them into uncompromising human weapons who live only for their righteous retribution. In the 16th century, an indigenous warrior responded to his own brutal mutilation by lashing blades to his severed wrists to carve through a colonial army. 300 years later, an American abolitionist realized peaceful debate was useless and opted to hack slaveholders to pieces with broadswords to ignite a war. Did the extreme, terrifying violence of these two men actually bend the arc of history, or were they just doomed individuals lashing out at machines they could never defeat? This map shows the geographical reach of the Spanish conquest in South America. In 1557, Governor Mendoza captured 100 Mapuche warriors here. To send a terrifying message to the natives, he ordered the prisoners' right hands and noses amputated. Elite fighters lost both hands. One of those elite fighters was Galvarino. When it was his turn at the chopping block, he calmly placed his right hand down. A hatchet severed it at the wrist. Showing absolutely no emotion, he laid his left hand on the block to be taken as well, and never made a sound. Once the mutilation was complete, Galvarino laid his head on the blood-soaked wood, demanding the Spanish kill him. Mendoza refused. He needed Galvarino alive, expecting him to stumble back to his tribe as a broken, agonizing warning. He severely miscalculated. Galvarino returned to his people and held his bloody stumps in the air. Instead of preaching surrender, he delivered a speech demanding an immediate, total counterattack against the invaders. Promoted to war chief, Galvarino refused to direct the battle from the rear. He had sharp knives tightly lashed to his severed wrists, charging directly into the Spanish forces at dawn and cutting down Mendoza's second-in-command. But sheer rage cannot deflect artillery. Spanish cannons and cavalry eventually overwhelmed the ambush. 3,000 Mapuche warriors died, and Galvarino was recaptured and executed. Half a world away and 3 centuries later, the United States was grappling with its own system of horrific brutality. This is John Brown, a man whose entire worldview was shaped by the violence of human bondage. In 1812, as a 12-year-old boy, Brown watched a U.S. Marshal savagely beat a young enslaved boy over the head with an iron shovel. But early exposure to unchecked cruelty forged a lifelong vow to destroy slavery at any cost. By 1856, the political tension over slavery had boiled over into a regional conflict known as Bleeding Kansas. Pro-slavery militias from Missouri regularly rode into anti-slavery settlements to burn buildings and terrorize the residents. After witnessing the sack of a free state town and reading reports of anti-slavery politicians being beaten unconscious on the Senate floor, Brown snapped. He concluded that responding to state-sanctioned violence with peaceful abolitionist debate was completely useless. Under the cover of night, Brown and his sons dragged a pro-slavery settler and 2 of his sons out of their home. They hacked them to pieces with broadswords in the dirt, finishing the father off with a point-blank pistol shot. 3 years later, Brown escalated from local murder to federal insurrection. This diagram illustrates his final gamble. He led a tiny raiding party to seize the federal armory at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. He planned to distribute its 100,000 weapons, triggering a massive, escalating slave rebellion across the South. The uprising never happened. His forces were quickly pinned down, surrounded, and captured by U.S. Marines commanded by Robert E. Lee. Brown was tried for treason and sentenced to the gallows. Walking to his execution, Brown handed his jailer a final note. In it, he acknowledged his military failure, but confirmed his absolute certainty that the crimes of the nation would never be purged away without immense bloodshed. If we look strictly at their immediate military objectives, both Galvarino and John Brown failed entirely. Neither man achieved the immediate battlefield victory they sought, and in the end, both were swiftly executed by the exact systemic powers they had dedicated their lives to destroying. but history rarely ends on the battlefield. Governor Mendoza's decision to dismember his captives to instill terror yielded the exact opposite result. Galvarino's bloody sacrifice elevated him from a mortal warrior into a legendary symbol of native defiance. The story of the man with knives for hands terrified the Spanish and inspired Mapuche resistance for generations. Similarly, John Brown's hanging sent a political shockwave across America. His total commitment to violence terrified Southern slaveholders, polarizing the nation and directly accelerating the American Civil War just a year later. His radicalism was ultimately vindicated by the very army that ended slavery. As Union troops marched south into combat, they sang a rallying cry: John Brown's body. When an oppressive system eliminates all peaceful paths to justice, it guarantees a violent reaction. The cruelty doesn't secure control. It inevitably forges the uncompromising wrath